Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, what we're going to be doing this week is a little bit different. It's an edifying divestment. It's a movement away from the typical nature of doing things, but only to come back to the typical way of learning with more intensity. That we're going to go into Sichos HaRan, which is almost like going into a side route off of the main thoroughfare of Likutei Moharan. But nevertheless, every movement off of the thoroughfare is only to kind of take the time needed to go back on. But this is going to give us insight. There's a Torah that I've really been wanting to learn, but I've been, pausing to teach it because I think it'll take us 2 weeks. But it's Ayin Beis in Tinyana. Ayin Beis in Tinyana, which is already the secret of the second Shem Ayin Beis, which is just Audio Tertov. But that's the Torah that I want to look at, where it starts off where it's very good to see oneself with the tzaddik. It's really good to be with the tzaddik, but even if a person can't do that, to see oneself with the tzaddik. So immediately words like that, are trigger points for those of us who at least try and see ourselves with the tzaddik. And in that Torah, he speaks about Sarei Alafim v'Sarei Meos. He speaks about the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu and the profundity of Moshe Rabbeinu as a leader who had the ability to go Keneged Kol Ruach V'Ruach, Ish Asher Ruach Bo. That Moshe Rabbeinu had the ability to convey and precisely give over the medicinal dosages of Torah in accordance with the receiver. Right? It wasn't just a full gush of expression that knows no limits. It was a very measured dosage, like the tzaddikim say about the tzaddikim, and it's true by the tzaddikim that if you listen close enough, you come to find that they're speaking directly to you. The person right next to you also thinks they're speaking directly to them. That's the secret of the words of the tzaddik, that it goes it's hyper essential in extended territories and extended directions. It could be essential to each and every person, even though each person is different. But that's a tzaddik like Moshe who has the ability to differentiate the dosages, to differentiate the amount of Torah being given over. Torah here meaning light, meaning expression, and ultimately in the history of Breslov, Sarei Meos and Sarei Alafim is known as a sugya that contains the secret of the relationship between Rebbe Nachman and the Baal HaTanya. That I've heard it in differentiating orders, but I think it's explicitly written that the Baal HaTanya was Sarei Alafim and also had the ability to transmit the Sarei Meos. And it was Rebbe Nachman's way of saying that even though we're different types of tzaddikim, fundamentally the unity of Breslov and Chabad in Sarei Alafim and Sarei Meos is part of that unity. Like we see in the first teaching of Likutei Moharan, Ki isha Yisraeli tzarich tamid le'stakel ba'seichel shel kol davar, le'kasher atzmo la'chochma shel kol davar. And Rav Avram ben Rav Nachman said, Mikan shetzrichim lomod Tanya. From here we learn that a person has to learn Tanya. And we know that there was a deep bond between the light of Rebbe Nachman and the light of the Baal HaTanya. And ultimately, it's like the secret of Chochma and Binah. The unity between Chabad and Breslov is the secret of the mind and the heart, Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. And this is going to be the relationship of Sarei Alafim and Sarei Meos. But because that's referenced in the Torah Ayin Beis, so it brought to mind Sicha Tzadi Gimel in Sichos HaRan, which is what I want to learn today. And it has everything to do with what we're always discussing, the relationship between Chochma and Binah. For our purposes, although it's not explicit in this text, there are enough sources that implicate, and there's Alukatei Halachos to see as well, that the Alpayim, thousands represent Chochma. Aleph. Aleph of a Chochma. That Chochma is rooted in the beginningness, and that Meos is going to be Binah, because the four categorizations of numbers in descending order, thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones, is the progression from Chochma to Binah to Zer Anpin to Malchus, with Malchus representing ones, Zer Anpin representing tens, Binah representing hundreds, and Chochma representing thousands. Now, there is obviously a way of looking at it reversed, but nevertheless, that doesn't detract from the way of looking at it in this lens right now. So Zakt the Heilige Rebbe, Da sheyesh or shehu meir be'elef oilamos. Rabbeinu said this on the first night of Hanukkah, the night before the bris of his son, who was supposed to be Mashiach. Rabbi Nachman's son was meant, in Rabbi Nachman's worldview, Shlomo Ephraim, I believe the name was, who was Nifter young, was the apple of Rabbeinu's eye and was seen as the Hamshacha. And ultimately, each tzaddik has to leave a ben and a Talmud. And so in the secret of being Mamshech, that or, so each of us then become the ben and the Talmud to the Torah of Rabbeinu. But this was a very powerful teaching that was being given over in a powerful time. Know that there's a light that shines forth in 1,000 worlds. It's a big light. It's the light of Chochma. When we're dealing with the greatness of Chochma, the infinitude of Chochma, the grandiosity of the bittul of Chochma, Olam HaAtzilus, it's so lofty, it's an or, it's an ayin, it's nothingness, that a simple person doesn't have the ability to receive it as a result of its greatness, meaning to say there's no tzimtzum to it, and therefore there's no ability to grasp it. Like the sunlight of the sun, which can be blinding if a person doesn't have the proper way of managing the intensity of the rays. For this, you need a very wise individual who has the ability of dividing thousands into hundreds. Now, over here, what's already incredible is that Chochma is thousands. Binah is hundreds. In order to break thousands down into hundreds, you have to come from a level that's even higher than the original Chochma, which is the Chacham Gadol, which is the secret of Keser. That only something that's higher has the ability of manipulating and dealing with in a healthy way something that's lower than it for the sake of rearranging it. And so if there's going to be a Chacham who has the ability of shifting the light of Chochma, which is thousands and ungraspable, into the light of Binah, which is graspable, so that means that it has to come from a place that's even higher than the both of them, which we know Das is the externalization of Keser because it has the capacity to synthesize the oppositional expressions of Chochma and Binah. But as Hasidus describes over and over, and it's implicit and explicit in the Ari, if something has the ability to synthesize below, which is strange because it's a lower power than the things it's coming to synthesize, it must mean, and it betrays the fact that that synthesizing middle actually is rooted in a place prior to and far greater than the original opposites of Chachma and Binah, which means that the interiority of Das is Keser. And because Keser is above Chachma and Das, it has the ability to convey to, because Keser is above Chachma and Binah, it has the ability of conveying to Das the ability to synthesize between the two. So in order to shift from the alpayim of the thousands of Chochma into the hundreds of Binah, to take a big light and make it accessible, a person has to in fact come from a place loftier than the Chochma itself. Dahainu, meaning to say, that what it means to be that Chacham Gadol, what it means to have that light of Keser, is to be able to take the light of Chochma and to distribute it in bite-sized, manageable pieces that don't overwhelm nor underwhelm, but rather they provide the sustenance necessary for the Ketanim B'mala, for those who are on a lower level, just gradationally, in order to receive it little by little, little by little. And so again, we're talking here about Chachma, which is the whole, which is light, which is everything good, and Binah, which is distortion, which is fragmentation, which is darkness, which is the beginningness of all that is concealed. And in order to be able to translate the illumination of Chochma down into the vessels of Binah, Rebbe Nachman is saying we need a Chacham Gadol who comes from a loftier place of Keser. Again, this is my humble understanding, and it could be fundamentally mistaken, but it needs to come from a place higher than the original Chochma in order to redistribute those illuminations of Chochma into bite-sized manageable pieces of Binah so that it can be conveyed to those who are below. So we have the typical breakdown of Olam Mosir also. Chochma corresponds to the world of Atzilus, corresponds to the world where there's no distortion. Even the vessels in the world of Atzilus, somehow, some way, by way of a miracle, by way of the secret of faith, the vessels themselves do not conceal the light. The vessels don't cease being vessels, but nevertheless, the vessels never cease also simply being reified expressions of the light itself in Olam HaAtzilus, to the degree that the impossible paradox is Ihu v'chivihu v'garmayu chad b'hoin. That in the world of Atzilus, the lights in the vessels are equal to the degree that concealment shines. It doesn't hold back. That's the light of Chochma. There's no concealment there. The light of Chochma doesn't like descending down into the stuckness of this world. But then after the world of Atzilus, there's the worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, there's a mesach, there's a partition that blocks the light of Chochma from going down, which means that we operate until the revelation of Mashiach Tzidkenu in perspectives of distortion, concealment, and separation. The gradations of Bria, which is a thin type of concealment, but it's the constriction of the mind. Yitzira, which is an even thicker form of concealment, is the felt sense of the emotional frequency. And then Olam Ha'asiya is the body itself. And then Olam Ha'asiya, the Asiya, is the stuckness of the body. V'chule, v'chule. And so how do we translate the light of Atzilus into the worlds of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya? So ultimately, it has to come from the Chacham Gadol, which is the light of Keser, which is the light of Adam Kadmon, because the world of Adam Kadmon transcends both Atzilus and Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. It has the ability to traverse to the uppermost limits of Olam HaAtzilus, as well as down to the lowest possible quadrants of the worlds of separation, because in that light of Keser, the whole and the part are equal because they're both reflective of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And only a person like that, with the wisdom of knowing that the descent into constriction is ultimately for the sake of revealing a deeper light, only a person like that has the wisdom to separate the thousands, that which looks big and beautiful, into something that is smaller and less pleasant. Ma'at ma'at. It's interesting, this double language of ma'at ma'at is the language that the Arizal uses when he talks about the tikkun of the shviros hakelim, which populate and create the worlds of separation as they're refined to create the partsufim of Olam HaAtzilus, that the birur takes place ma'at ma'at. And so over here, to transform the light of Atzilus down into the worlds of separation, it has to be ma'at ma'at, one step after the other. Someone who comes into the worlds of separation with the notion of, I'm going to illuminate the light of Chochma down here, is going to be sorely mistaken, because that's not going to be handled. That's called shviros hakelim. Shviros hakelim is too much light and too little vessels. The goal, like we said before, is to create the vessels, but you have to be operating from a perspective, like the Ramchal says, of the person who's already been through the maze. Because the person knows the way out of the maze and they know the way out of the worlds of separation, they're not worried about the worlds of separation. And therefore, they can allow that light to descend down into the worlds of separation as well, because they know what will be revealed. Chaver, you with me? Kamol Mashal. For example, here, Rabbeinu is not using an example of a big sod. It's got nothing to do with sod over here. It's got to do with the quality as well as the quantity that is contained within that quality of the idea that is being conveyed. When a person says a pshat or a chiluk, a lamdas, gadol ma'od, but it's very big. It's very big. It's a big idea. And as a result of the greatness of this idea and the intensity of this idea, people below don't have the ability to receive it as a result of its greatness. When it comes to pshat, when it comes to one fell swoop of an idea, the nothingness of Chochma, you can't particularize that. Either you take the whole thing or you don't take any of it. There's no separating wholeness. And yes, in the innermost interiority, as we're going to see, one who touches a part of the whole grasps the entirety of the whole, as we know from the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. But nevertheless, when it comes to grasping an idea, a person can't come along and say, oh, I'm only going to take part of this idea, because then they're going to be losing out on the entirety of the idea. And so a person who's giving over big ideas but doesn't have the ability of breaking it down has left the listener at a deficiency, because they can't receive the entirety of that idea, and there's no value theoretically in receiving only half of the idea. But when the Chacham has the ability to uncover that secret of Binah within themselves, that allows them to fracture the pshat into separate quadrants and to separate them into clear parts and aspects of itself. So then the person who's operating in the world of Biyah has the ability of understanding the matters, one in according to each piece, and I'm not overwhelmed by the whole and the grandiosity of it all. That's the mashal. Zakt Rabbeinu, kach yesh or. So too there's a light, shehu meir be'elef olamos, that shines in 1,000 worlds, light of Chochma, light of Atzilus. V'hu hasaga achas, dahainu she'i efshar lahasigo itoy ela kulo aval loy b'mektzas ki hu or echad pashat. When it comes to the world of Atzilus, if all you're getting is Chochma, you can't separate it, you can't differentiate it. You have to first and foremost uncover the potency of Binah within it in order to begin to differentiate it. But when you're dealing just with Chochma and just with goodness and just with light, without any openness towards a distortion of the worlds of separation or resistance to spiritual growth, etc., so then a person is not going to be able to receive this lofty light of Chochma, because it can't be broken apart. It's one singular light. It's Pashat. Ach Talmud Chacham, but a Talmud Chacham, which is that Chacham Gadol, Shehu Noikim V'Noiter, who has the strength of severity. Kol Talmud Chacham Sheino Noikim V'Noiter Kanachash is not someone who's going to be able to stand upon their words. This koyach and the gvura and the oz of the tzaddik, who has the ability to go down into the world of Binah, mata oiz biyadi, that secret of the nachash and the mata that are meshapich from one to the other, the descent from Chochma into Binah, the allowance of the emergence of the Lamed Beis Nesivas Chochma, which is the secret of Havein b'Chochma, the potential towards separation as it exists in the wholeness of Chochma, as it then expresses itself within the Chacham Bebina, which is the residual trace of the wholeness that continues to exist in separation. That's the secret of the Talmud Chacham, was the ability to be Noikim v'Noiter, who has the ability and the Gvura and the Oz to understand the secret of Dir B'Tachtonim, and they descend down into the worlds of separation. That person has the ability of separating thousands, light of Chachma, into meos, into hundreds. To take the grandiose light of Yichud Ilah, of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and to break it down into bite-sized fractals that continue to contain the essential quality of the klal itself, so that it can be received as described before. This aspect of the gets crazy. And this aspect of the Talmud Chacham, who has the ability of drawing down from Chochma into Bina to take the whole and break it into parts, with that koyach of Oz, which is Noikim v'Noiter, that has the ability of breaking 1,000 into hundreds. This is explicit in the pasuk itself in Mishlei Yud Zayin Tes. Yud Zayin is Gematria Tov and Oz Tes is Tov, although I don't know you could darshan anything, so certainly you could darshan the prakim and the psukim, so Yud Zayin is Gematria Tov and Tes is the Os of Tov Uganas Begave. So the pasuk says as follows: V'shoine b'davar mafrid aluf. Someone who's teaching separates aluf, separates the aleph. U'beperish Rashi, someone who learns with the severity, with that koyach of Beis Shammai, which the Gra writes is the Sichos hamoichin, the intensity and the fury of the mind in its perpetual attempt, like they said about Rav Chaim Brisker, that he had to put his head like into the refrigerator afterwards, or whatever they had, in order to cool his mind down, because of the intensity and the movement of the mind. So Rashi says a Talmud Chacham who enters in with this violent, nokem v'noiter, what they're going to do, someone who goes against their friend in learning like this, they take HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of the picture. That's how Rashi understands the pasuk. That shoyne bedavar, someone who learns noikim v'noiter mafrid aluf, they take the alufa shel olam and take HaKadosh Baruch Hu out. Kach perish Rashi, says Rabbeinu. Aval, but there's a steer on Rashi. What's the steer on Rashi? Talmud Chacham sarach taikaliyas noikim v'noiter. We know that a tzaddik and a Talmud Chacham has to have this severity of mind. Chazal tell us in Yoim Adaf Chaf Beis Amid Beis, which is the secret Rabbeinu wanted to reveal the Torah of Atikas Tima'a in the Maisa Lechem on Yom Kippur, which was when he had a dream that the food became letters themselves. So Yuma is when you're eating from the man, and the food itself becomes the Chaf Beis Osios. So Rabbeinu says there's actually proof that, unlike Rashi, that we have to be noikim v'noiter. Why? Kol Talmud Chacham sheinam noikim v'noiter v'chulei is not going to be successful in their limud. Ach perish pasuk hu kanal. This is how to explain it, says Rabbeinu, not like Rashi. Shetalmud Chacham shehu noikim v'noiter. A Talmud Chacham who has this gvura and the koyach of Oz to descend down into the worlds of separation, to take on that form of bina. Yochel chalek alafim lemeos. He has the ability of separating the thousands into hundreds. Bezehu, and this is the meaning of the pasuk, v'shoyne bedavar, someone who learns properly, hainu noikim v'noiter, like Rashi says, mafrid aluf, meaning to say they don't separate the aluf from the world, but they break the aluf down into composite parts so that it can be grasped. Mafrid aluf, hainu shehu mafrid u'machalek alafim lameos k'nizke le'el. Rabbeinu is saying, Adarabba, Ibcha Mustaber Rashi, the Nekima and the Netira is ultimately that descent down into Bina, which is the breaking up of the Aleph, in order to reveal an even greater light that comes from the Talmud Chacham. This is the kavana of the Lamed Beis Shinayim. The Lamed Beis Shinayim, in one of the kavanas of Achila, is the shape of the Aleph when it's split in half. The Aleph is a Vav with an upper Yud and a lower Yud. But when you split it in half, it becomes the Vav is split into half. So you have a Vav and a Yud, and then another Vav and a Yud, which is the Gematria of 32, the 16 upper teeth and the 16 lower teeth. And what the Arizal says is that Binah is actually Aleph in this context. Binah is Aleph, and when we descend down into Binah and split open the Gevuros, what we come to find is Chochma there. And so it's specifically in the splitting itself and the descending down into the separation of that original light of Chochma, into the worlds of separation, where the tzaddik has the ability of revealing how we can come back to Chochma with more intensity, which brings us back to Pnimius Chochma, Pnimius Atik, which is the light of Keser. V'zehu sha'amru Rabbeinu Zachornan lebracha. And this is what Chazal say in Shabbos Daf Samech Gimel. Shabbos is the light of Bina, Samech Gimel is the Shem Havaya, the Sag. If you see a Talmud Chacham in the light of descending down into the Gvuros of Bina and the Oiz of Elikim, which is the Mata Elikim Biyadi, that tzaddik, that Talmud Chacham has the ability to be Noiter v'Noikim Kenachash, Chagrehu al Masnecha l'Soif shetehenem et Talmudo. You should wrap it around yourself like a gartel, because that's going to be a place that you eventually enjoy the Torah from. Because the descent into the Sichos Amoichin, into the burning passion of the mind, when it becomes a Talmud of Beis Shammai, when it goes from the cool, calm, collected waters of Chachma down into the burning Eish of Bina, the mind's descent there, it's going to feel like a Noikim v'Noiter Kenachash. It's mahapech from this place to that place, but nevertheless, it's specifically there that the light is going to be revealed. When the tzaddik has the ability of separating the chochma into bina so that it can be graspable as a result of the mata oz, with the ability to descend down into severity for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a person can take that great light, the thousands, and separate it and make it accessible and bite-sized and available in the secret of hundreds, in small parts. In that way, not in the Chochma, but the descent from Chochma into the lip of Chochma, which is Bina, which then descends down into the worlds of separation, which is the secret of Noitim v'Noiter Kenachash. So in that place, the light can be distributed in a graspable way. And yes, it looks smaller, it's more humble, it's not as loud, it's not as unified, it's not as mystical in its orientation, it's not as oceanic, but nevertheless, in the descent down into the particularity of it, we have the unique opportunity of burning away all of the concealment of the prat to reveal the watery cloud that rests at the center of it. That represents the air that remains after all is destroyed in the fierce fire of the mind. Like the Rav Chaim Vital said about the Ari, that when he would study halacha, he would sweat to the point of absolute exhaustion, because what he was doing with his mind was he was breaking down every element of concealment. These are the weapons of the mind that the Adir Bamarom explains: the spear of the mind, the sword, the bow and arrow, the slingshot, and the slingshot of Moshe. Chochma alone doesn't do much. It's nice to look at, but a person can't, this is what Rabbeinu was saying on Hanukkah, looking at the Oros, and Rahman al-Islam, we don't know what Rabbeinu saw in the first lights of Hanukkah, before the bris of his son. But whatever Rabbeinu saw, it could be that what was coming out, and again, all of this is a humble opinion, and all of it is b'derech tefillah, if any of it is true, but it could be that what Rabbeinu was seeing was that Chochma alone is not enough. Sometimes Chochma is an inaccessible ideal, and the ideal remains an inaccessible idea, and it's only in the ability to draw it down into the particularized points of accessibility that the Torah comes most to life. Because aval haseichel, but the wisdom, the hatam, and the depth of taste and reason that is emergent, shal ha'inyan zeh mipnei ma mishu noikem v'noiter yochel lachalek alpayim l'meus v'chulei, zeh amok v'chulei. So over here, the two v'chules already imply a certain form of censorship. Not censorship, I mean, there was censorship in the history of the texts of Breslov coming in. Breslov it had to be dak shebedak, but we live in a generation where after Rav Avram ben Rebbe Nachman, and I'm forgetting who his main Talmud was, who came to Yerushalayim, the Siach Sarfei Kodesh, Rav Avram ben Rebbe Nachman, the Sichos Sarfei Kodesh, Rav Levi Yitzchak Bender. And from there on, and then in Rav Shik also, we have the publication of all that was censored. All that was censored, all of the Torahs from HaRan and Sichos HaRan have come to light. All of the machlokas around them, and there's a profoundly beautiful unity amongst the quote-unquote academic approach to Breslov nowadays in Eretz Yisrael and really around the world, and the tzaddikim, in the sense that it used to be one way, and there was like a certain opinion that was brought out from the world that was outside of Rabbeinu, and then there was a clear rectification, really, in the writings of Rav Tzvi Mark, who what he's done for Breslov and the refinement of the text and the editorial process and giving us everything that was concealed and revealing to us what Rabbeinu felt about Mashiach and the depths of what we don't understand. And Rav Tzvi Mark's whole perspective is that ultimately Likutei HaRan is a portal, and that there were 3 books, and the Rebbe has taken this and described it as well, that there's 3 books that Rabbeinu wrote. Rabbeinu wrote Likutei HaRan, Rabbeinu wrote the Sefer HaNisraf, which was the burnt book, and Rabbeinu wrote the Sefer HaGonuz, which was the book that was concealed, perhaps not even yet written, but also written in a real way. And what the Rebbe is describing, based on a lot of these new writings, is that it's specifically Likutei HaRan, which becomes the portal, like we've spoken about, in which a person encounters the tzaddik, where you walk with the Torah, where by learning the Torah, you're accessing the wisdom that continues to live within the ink itself throughout however the book is printed. One is accessing the seichel, the nefesh, and the panim of the tzaddik, like we learned. And so these tzaddikim were bringing out the full textual reality of Rebbe Nachman's world. I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent, Chaver, I apologize. But what I don't know what's being hinted to here, what's not being expressed, but we can read the words. Rebbe Nachman explains this process from Chochma into Binah. Fine, we have that. That's something we've discussed before. But the deepest secret of all is not the how. It's not the how. It's real because anybody could do it. But the seichel and the tam shala inyan zem mipnei ma mi shehu noikem v'noito yochol lachalik alpayim l'meos. But why the ability to separate the hundreds from within the thousands, to break it down into bite-sized manageable pieces? Why it is that that's what a person has to do? That's a very, very deep thing. Meaning to say, Rabbeinu is revealing to us a process, a mechanism. But when it comes to understanding the reason that the mechanism is such, it's not talui in das enoshi. It's not because Binah allows, by breaking the idea up, I make it into smaller ideas. There's a spiritual secret that's inherent within that process, and that's what's taking place. That the limud and the thinking is ultimately just a segula to hold the illumination of the words of the tzaddik that rest within the words. Vida, and now Rabbeinu is going to take us really, really in a very secret way across kind of a landscape of a lot of the sugyas that emerge from within this space of the descent from Chochma into Binah. Vida ki mi sheyodea zos hu yachol lahachyos mesim. Someone who understands the secret, of drawing thousands into hundreds, of Chochma into Binah, has the ability to be machaya mesim, to rejuvenate the dead. Like Chazal said on Psachim Sameches, which is the secret of Pesach, in Zohar Chelek Aleph Kuf Yud Daled, Asidim Tzadikim La'achayos Mesim. In the future, the Tzadikim themselves are going to bring about Tchias HaMesim. V'yodea Mahu Meis. And a person who knows this ability to separate the thousands into hundreds, to descend from Chochma into Binah, they'll understand what death means. Because as a result of separating the thousands into hundreds and then drawing the light of the thousands into the hundreds themselves, because it's never a descent from Chochma and a loss of Chochma, but it's always a dragging down of Chochma and the Laman Beis Nesivas Chochma into the leva of Binah itself. Al Yedei Zeh, someone who knows how to do this, Na'aseh mimaves meos. Because the word maves is death, but when you draw the aleph into it, which is the taking of the aleph and putting it into the meah, you transform maves into meos. And by drawing the light of the aleph into the light of separation, what we're doing is we're revealing the capacity to bring life back to the dead. Now, again, based on what we've been describing, death over here is not it's every part of the sugya of death, up to and including up to the part that's unspeakable, and what one cannot speak of, because it's the limit of everything. But this element of death is what we've learned from the Zohar Kadosh, and the Gra makes this very important for us, that Kol man denachas medag dilei ikra misa, every descent from the original level is considered as if it's a death. That's Shviras HaKelim, when things fell from Chochma into Binah, from Atzilus into Bri Yitzir and Asiya, that was the element of death. So if we're talking now about the descent from Chochma into Binah, from the thousands into the hundreds, in order to come back to a place that reveals the great capacity of Keser to be unifying both of them, so then we understand that a person who understands this process of the need to go down from Chochma into Bina and to allow the light to minimize itself through the vessels that reveal it by way of containing it, so that person knows the secret of the Hamtakas Adinim and the building of the Olam of Tohu, which is Tchias HaMeisim Mamish, which is why the Leshem Shabbat V'Chaloma says Tchias HaMeisim is something that's perpetually taking place on every aspect of existence, and the secret of the lights of tohu and chaos that fell in the shattering and are perpetually emergent and giving shape to the unfolding process of rectified history that's moving perpetually upwards towards the light of Mashiach. That's the entire Dea Beis. The entire Dea Beis of the Leshem is talking about this sugya. And the secret of drawing down Chachma into Bina is the secret of Tchias HaMeisim. That's why we say the Lashon of Machayim Meisim 5 times in the second bracha, which is Keneged Yitzchak and the Gevuros and the Kavanah of the Mikvah, which is the world of Tikkun, where a person goes after Shvira. So this secret of Teres Mesim corresponds to the 5 partsufim in the Olam HaAtzilus that are being formed by the broken vessels. The broken vessels ultimately are fixed, and they create the 5 partsufim of Olam HaAtzilus. That's why we say Tchias HaMeisim 5 times in the bracha of Gevurim, the secret of Ata Gibor LaOlam Hashem, which is Roshei Tevos Egaleh, which is the secret that something is going to be revealed from within something that's shattered at the present moment. But nevertheless, it's going to be something bigger. Umisha Eino Yodea Zo, someone who doesn't have this secret in hand. Eino Yodea Mipnei Mahu Achshav B'Simcha Ve'eino Yodea HaYichud Shel Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Vod. Someone who doesn't know the secret of descending from Chochma into Bina doesn't understand why in this moment they have joy. Now, I don't know if it's saying what I think it's saying, but what I'm reading this as, there's a story from Rav Usher Freund that there was a Pella Gadol of a Yid who walked around the world, and he was Besimcha. And it was a Pella and Noira in the eyes of each and every person. How it could be that a person was Besimcha in this Welt. And ultimately, it's a short story, and it ends that he knew the secret of being Mahapech Yesh La'ayin. He knew the secret of transforming something into nothingness. And this again is what Rabbeinu opens up, Sipori Maisios Meshanim Kanmonios, the Sheva HaBatlarim. It starts off with Asaper Lachem Eich Pam Hayu Smechim. I'm going to tell you how once upon a time they were happy. That's what Rebbe Nachman gives us. I'm going to tell you once upon a time how they were happy. But what does Rav Avram ben Rav Nachman tell us? He says that that's not all that Rabbeinu said. Rabbeinu says, I'm going to tell you how once upon a time they found joy from within despondency itself. So I heard in the name of the Rebbe, by Rav Tzvi Mark's son, who is a very close chassid of the Rebbe, that Rebbe Nachman's job was to tell us what we needed to know. Rav Avram ben Rav Nachman's job, like we said earlier, where they began recording and revealing Kisvuzos L'Dor Achron, it was to ensure that we knew exactly what Rabbeinu said. So when it comes to Avoida, in the path of Rabbeinu, in the path of Breslov, so the one thing that we don't have to learn from is the Tzabrochenkite and the awareness of the shvira of it all, because Rabbeinu did that for us. And Avada, we still do it, but because we know that a tzaddik did it before and that this is normal that we're encountering this craziness, so it softens the blow. As Rabbeinu said, there's going to be a great kfira in the world. My people are going to be okay, but there's going to be a great kfira. So why announce it, even though there's nothing to do about it? Because they'll remember to be mechazik themselves. And so Rabbeinu said, the only way to understand why a person can be happy in Galus, why a person can find Simcha right now, Simcha is in Bina. Simcha comes from a sense of hishtoikakus. Menucha is in Chachma. Oineg is in Chochma. Simcha is a different thing. Simcha is with Basar and Yayin. It's a Resichas HaMoichin. Menucha doesn't demand that, but Bina itself, the awakening towards Simcha, is a Bikush Achar Shlemus. The insanity of assuming we can reach some element of shleimus, and then settling back into the secret of drawing that ungraspable wholeness into the place we're at right now in our partiality, which is the secret of Ezuhu Ashir Hasameach Bechelko, Simcha Chelkis, a simcha that emerges from a broken place. So Rabbeinu is saying that someone who doesn't know the secret of drawing Chochma into Binah, explain why you're happy in a world like this. If you don't understand the drawing down of infinitude through the finite lens in order to accentuate the power of the infinite in a doubled and tripled and infinite growth-oriented way, then what reason Simcha Mazois read Koheles? Chazal knew this very well. That's why they had to have a subversive humor. It wasn't just exuberance and joy. You don't find that. There's warnings against that. Only when you're wearing tefillin, it's okay. But there's a subversive humor that transforms the darkness of Bavel into the Schoik di Yitzchak, which is a secret of transforming concealment into revelation. If you don't understand the descent into Bina, then you don't understand why you're besimcha right now. This could hint to the Va'achshav of Rabbeinu that it used to be that all of the beginnings were from Pesach. Va'achshav veloisim, and the tzaddikim tell us that Va'achshav is Purim itself. It's the Gvuros of Yitzchak. It's the Simcha in the Chalal HaPanui itself. It's the Ad Lo Yada. Person who understands, you won't understand the joy of Purim, and you won't understand why you could be happy right now. A person won't know the secret of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Lamvad. Yichud Tata, the revelation that comes from the lowest place imaginable. But the Mittler Rebbe says that the Maggid of Mezrich was Zoicha at the end of his life to be masig the secret of Yichud Tata. What do you mean? Adarabba, Ipcha Mistaber, Yichud Ilah is higher than Yichud Tata. Alpayim is higher than Meos. No. Adarabba, Ipcha Mistaber, it's exactly that. Roshei Tevos Ima, the secret of Bina, V'nahapechu, you come to find that it's specifically Lamata Me'asar Tvachim, the Dir B'tachtoin Mamish, that you're going to reveal the higher light. And the Balatanya was amongst the youngest student of the Maggid, but he was the biggest as well on a certain level. He had that Azos, he had that Mata Oz. And when the Maggid died, they gathered together to try and, collect together the activities, the pu'ulos that the Maggid used to engage in, and see if they remembered what they remembered. And they remembered that towards the end of his life, the Maggid would go out to the agamim, to the swamps of wherever he was, in those swamps, and what he would do is he would walk in order to hear the sounds in the morning. And the Talmidim asked why. Why did he go there specifically? And nobody had an answer. And the Baal Tanya, the youngest, answered, he says, he went there to hear the frogs. He went there to hear the frogs. And in order to understand what it means that he went there to hear the frogs, it could be that the song that the frogs sing is Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Vod. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Vod is the Tzipor Deya, is the Tzvardeya that knows the secret of Mesiras Nefesh for the sake of revealing the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we're going to see in this week's Parsha. The secret of the croak of the Tzvardeya. I heard mi peh el peh in Panim el Panim from Rav Matel Zilber Shlita that by all of the Makos, Moshe Rabbeinu had to exit Mitzrayim in order to daven for the Makos to end. Because Eretz Mitzrayim was such a thick level of concealment that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't be poel what he needed to be poel, except for Makas Svardeya. Why? Why did Moshe Rabbeinu have the ability to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from within Mitzrayim by Makat Svardeya? Because Makat Svardeya is the secret of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Vod, is the secret of Yichud Tata, is the secret that Hashem is revealed everywhere in the tzimtzum and the concealment of it all, in the Bina itself. One who doesn't understand the secret of the descent from Chochma into Bina will never understand the secret of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Vod, Yichud Tata. Ve'eno deya mazu tzikei kedera sha'amar Rabbeinu zachornu lebracha mashal lebas melech sher hirikei tzikei kedera taimer yesh lo ganai loy tamer yesh lo tzar ve'eno deya ma. The deepest secret of the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Nun Vav, which is the Hamtakas of the Dinim of Haravas Rivenu Adanas Dinenu Nekomas Nekmasenu, those 5 news which are the either the Par Dinim or the Shach Dinim of Pesachim, which is the Shorish of Bina. So the Gemara says that Moshe Rabbeinu hears Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Vod. He sees, he senses the secret of the unity that comes from below, from the palace of Paro itself, Boel Paro. He senses it already, but he doesn't know what to do about it, because to reveal this, that Hashem is everywhere revealed and there's no difference between above and below, is not so appropriate for a Bas Melech to say, because what does that do for being the son of the king? I don't have to be the son of the king. I could be hanging out in Gehenna, Rahman al-Islam, and I could also be equally close. And that's not yet ready to be revealed yet, out loud yet. We can't say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Lambad, except in the secret of Bittul Begashmius, which is the Chaf Beis Osios of Yom Kippurim. But Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't not say it because it represented such a potency of the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu by way of concealment itself that he had to say it one way or the other, and therefore all he did was whisper it. All of this is only understood if we understand the descent from Chochma to Binah. Chash mechashmal. The secret of saying it by way of not saying it. Chashmal means silence and speech. But why are we describing silence of chashmal as a state of silence? Silence is not typically defined as an active state. It's the negation of speech. Elama, there's an active form of silence which conveys a preparation towards language which is not yet uttered or accentuated. So the chash of chashmal is the secret of what Moshe Rabbeinu was beholding and didn't know how to engage with it. The secret of matat, the secret of the worlds of separation and the radical unity that comes from within the shifting colors. A person is not going to understand what it means to go down into the realms of concealment, into klipas noga, into the rishus, which is afilu kol ha'olam dayo, as the Gemara says. Even if the entirety of existence was ink, it would not be enough to fill the chalalo shel rishus. It wouldn't have enough to fill the void of rishus. Rishus is the secret of malchus. It's the secret of tzimtzum. The shame of malchus and the shame membeis is shin kaf vav tzadi yud taf shavasenu kabel ushma tzakasenu yodea ta'alumos. It's gematria rishus. Rishus is malchus. It's the chalal shel rishus. It's the secret of the noga and the entire reality of being a Beinani in this world. Kamosha kasav v'noiga loy saviv. This is the purpose of descending down, to uncover from within the gluros themselves and to be mezachech, the clothing of the big day or with an ayin that were the congealment of the big day or with an aleph, and to return it back into the guf chashmal, which is the secret of the gvuros that reveal more than what the light of chesed could reveal. And a person doesn't know what it means for a ben adam to become the sight of the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The ma'aser merkava is how the avos heim hamerkava, that in the process of hamshachas hamoichin, the chagas themselves develop a shlish elyon, a new shlish, which becomes the chabad of themselves. We find that the chagas becomes the chabad. Separation becomes the seat in which reality is going to be revealed. There was an inherent wholeness within separation that was just waiting there to be revealed. That's the secret of the Ma'aseh Merkava. Bris, and a person doesn't know what a bris is. This is the night before his son's bris, a cutting for the sake of connecting. The light of Binah, a severing that connects. And a person doesn't know why there's machlokas on a person. This is Rabbeinu talking about himself. Mashiach Tzidkenu is going to know all of this in its fullness. The tzaddikim generally only have a way of grasping things once things are broken down from Chochma into Binah. Ve'ilu hatzaddikim shehem noikim v'noitrim sheyecholim la'asos me'alafim meyos hem chagura l'mashiach. And those tzaddikim who have the severity of Binah to descend down with the mataos to separate the Chochma into the Binah itself, they are the chagura to Mashiach. That is the snake that becomes the gartel from Mashiach Tzidkenu. Ki amru Rabbeinu z'chonam l'bracha. Chazal told us in Re'isa Talmud Chacham Shu Noikim V'Noiter Kanachash. Nachash is the mata that's mashapich back and forth. Nachash is the gematria of Mashiach. It's the Noiga Loi Saviv, the secret of the Lavyasan. Chagreu al Masnecha. Hainu Bechinas Chagoyra LeMashiach. Shene'amar bo, as it's written, V'hayat Tzedek Ezor Masnav. It was Tzedek, righteousness, Malchus itself. Ketarguma ve'yoyt tzadikayot sachar sachar lo. Sachar sachar, there are going to be tzadikim that are going to be surrounding Mashiach, those tzadikim who know the secret of being machalek alpayim to meos. Hainu bechinas matin matin, the secret of breaking it down into meya meya, of taking the language of Misa and transforming it into Meya Meya, Hainu Meos, Hainu Mishiyachol Lachalik Alafim Lemeos, Heim Chagura LeMashiach. They are the belt for Mashiach Tzidkenu. Ve'elu Atzadikim and Mechayin Es Atzadikim HaKatanim. And these tzadikim have the ability of drawing down that light of Chochma into a way of Bina itself. These are the tzadikim who draw the light down to a lower level so that everybody can enjoy it and everybody can benefit it. This is all true within the self. Each and every one of these tzadikim is in the self. There's the tzaddik on the level of Chochma, there's the tzaddik on the level of Bina, which is Noikim v'Noiter, and there's the Chacham Gadol who has the ability to know from beginning already the Eitza Ye'utza of Keser, to look down into Chachma and realize Chachma, the way it looks externally, is not the final matter. Chachma is incomprehensibly bright in its essence, and Chachma is the secret of all things. but Chochma left alone prior to the descent into Binah does not uncover its inner interiority, which is a secret that brings us back to Keser itself. So Keser looks down Kavyachal and it sees the externality of Chochma and the necessity of breaking up Chochma and its externality so that it can be processed into individualized parts, because only then there's going to be the unity of the Klal and the Prat, like we saw in the Zohar Kadosh from today, especially with the Ateres Tzvi. And this is the secret of what we saw in the Shah Yichud with the Havein B'Chachma and Chacham B'Bina. And it's also where we're at in Adir B'Marom, which is ultimately the secret of shifting from a mindset of Chachma into Bina so that we can descend down into Zer Anpin and Malchus, where in spite of the fact that it appears to be a descent lower and lower, nevertheless, it's going to be the light that reveals the highest possible light in our lives, Amir Hashem.